suddenly orphaned while in Zambouli in Africa with her parents, rather predestined and prophesied by fate to be so. She is raised by the natives with all sorts of magical, spiritual powers that she will later use to defend her people and the rest of those huddled together in that nation from a usurper to the throne that after having murdered his own brother, only wants to exploit the natural resources of everybody. This is 1984, Tanya Roberts, Sheena, Queen of the Jungle. Sheena is one of those attempts to turn a very early pulp magazine, pre-comic book sort of adventurous into something for the big screen. And if you look up the history of this, different people, different studios had contemplated doing it for some time. There were different versions and beginnings and starts and that didn't complete anything till finally down this long woven path we end up with Tanya Roberts as Sheena. It is not a box office success. It more or less has had a cult following. Check it out though. Sheena is very interesting because, well, they updated it from the old pulp magazines. A lot of those pulp magazines, even the Phantom from the comic strip, set in Africa, well, they didn't give you a very good view of life in Africa. Certainly not a very complete one or a modern one. In Sheena, the film version, they do the best they can to update this. And you're doing a story about the white woman raised in the jungle. This is she's sort of Tarzan, but she's sort of not. The white woman who is prophesied to come, which is sort of weird, especially with Never Fly Now in the days of woke. Nevertheless, it works out. So in this version, she is orphaned when her parents are killed in a cave-in while trying to get a hold of this sacred healing soil in Zambouli because they want to smuggle it out and study it for the good of the world. But leaving their daughter behind to be raised by the village shaman among the Zambouli, the female shaman, the shamaness, the shaman raises her and she ends up imbued with all this mystical power. Sheena does a good job of giving us people living this village type lifestyle, which is still common in much of the continent, and offsetting it to the fact that their territory is within a larger kingdom in Africa, part of which is far more modern and sort of in touch with the 20th century world. The football hero from America, who's actually the brother of the king, overthrows his brother, becomes king so that he can exploit this territory in Zambouli. It's really hard to say why Sheena is not a better movie because it is very solidly mediocre. But everything about the way they updated it, the way that they weave the narrative in this very logical way, there's not a lot of surprises. It's sort of, knowing that they're going to expose the evil deeds of the king. They're going to save the day and rescue the village. And they're going to, how this works out. And the cameraman, news reporter that falls in with Sheena, of course, they're going to be love interests. Of course, you know this. And the actor who plays him, and I'm blanking on his name, does a good job. Tanya Roberts does a good job. It's not Oscar worthy, but their moments and their romance and their having to part at the end, and it's very well done. But for most of the movie, it doesn't feel that. There's bits and pieces like that where you're like, this is good. But for most of the time that you're watching it, it doesn't feel like it carries the gravitas of the situation. It feels like more lighthearted or not. It just doesn't carry the gravitas. I don't know how else to say it. It doesn't feel consistent throughout the movie. And I think this is what makes it sort of clunky, and it keeps it from being a great film. It's a good film, but it's hard to really get into the parts of it that are very emotionally connective when other parts of it in between come across as sort of campy or just don't have the same feel, like different parts of different movies were pieced together to create a consistent narrative. but you do get a consistent narrative. Everything that happens makes sense. There's all those good old-fashioned callbacks. Things you saw at the beginning, you're going to see at the end. Things you saw and weren't clear on make total sense at the end. All of this is really good. It should have been a much better movie. Maybe if the direction, the acting was a little more on point, the direction, the editing, I don't know. All of the elements are there, and it is still a solid film. This is why it's got a cult following. It just doesn't grab you everywhere the way that parts of it does, and then it just feels inconsistent then by the end. But it is out there on Tubi to be seen. Check it out. If you haven't seen it, let me know what you think. Sheena, Queen of the Jungle.